I never expected to be humiliated at my own sister's engagement party. But when her fiancé asked me one simple question, I said one word. And what happened next changed how my family looked at me forever. The party was held in my parents' backyard, strung with fairy lights and rented champagne flutes, everything curated to look effortless and impressive. Evelyn floated through it all like she owned the air, laughing a little too loudly. Hand always angled so the ring caught the light. At some point, I found myself beside her and her fiancé, Mark, as they accepted congratulations from a cluster of relatives. That's when Evelyn waved a careless hand in my direction and smiled. "Oh, this is Verity," she said. "She's just admin." The word just landed harder than the music thumping from the speakers. Mark turned to me, polite curiosity on his face. "Oh, cool. So what do you actually do?" There it was, a question I'd learned to dodge. I felt every eye drift toward me, waiting for something unimpressive, something small. I opened my mouth and gave a one-word answer. I won't tell you what it was yet, but I remember how the air changed when I said my name is Verity, and in my family everything needs a neat label. You're either impressive or invisible, successful or still figuring things out. Evelyn had always been the easy one to categorize. Charismatic, ambitious, loudly accomplished. She collected praise the way other people collected business cards. I learned early where I fit. At holidays, relatives asked Evelyn about promotions and bonuses while I was asked to help clear plates. When I mentioned work, it was met with nods and quick subject changes. "That courthouse thing," my aunt would say, as if it were a phase. I learned that staying quiet kept the peace. Being invisible meant no one challenged me, but no one saw me either. Still, there were moments that stung. Evelyn laughing about my boring desk job. Jokes about how I loved filing. Every laugh tightened something in my chest, something I told myself didn't matter. Only one person ever looked at me differently. Cousin Lily would ask real questions. She listened. She noticed when I went quiet. Sometimes she'd lean over and whisper, "They have no idea, do they?" I'd just shrug, pretending it didn't matter. I told myself I didn't need their validation. But every time Evelyn laughed at my courthouse job, something inside me tightened. Something that was about to break free. Family dinners followed a script so predictable I could have recited it in my sleep. We'd gather around the table, plates still steaming, and within minutes Evelyn would have the floor. She talked about new projects, new plans, new people who needed her. Everyone leaned in. Phones were set aside. Questions followed questions, each one feeding the next. I sat 2 seats down, nodding at the right moments, cutting my food into smaller pieces than necessary. When someone did remember to ask about me, it was usually an afterthought. "And you, Verity, still at the courthouse?" The question wasn't curiosity. It was punctuation. A way to close the sentence and move on. When I tried, once or twice, to explain what I actually did, I watched their eyes glaze over. The shift was immediate. Discomfort. Evelyn's smile would tighten, just slightly, like she'd bitten into something sour. My accomplishments had a way of doing that. They didn't fit the version of me my family was comfortable with. So I learned to soften my words, round the edges, turn real responsibilities into something smaller and safer. I said things like, "It's mostly paperwork," or, "Nothing exciting." Not because it was true, but because truth made people uneasy. It wasn't cruelty. That took me a long time to understand. It was habit. And habits are hard to break. Once a family decides who you are, they arrange everything around that idea. Challenging it feels rude. Inconvenient. Easier to let me stay quiet than to rewrite the story they'd been telling themselves for years. Still, silence carries weight. Every dinner added another layer. Another swallowed sentence, another joke laughed off. The heaviness didn't arrive all at once. It settled slowly, like dust you don't notice until the room feels hard to breathe in. Under the table, Lily would sometimes reach for my hand and give it a quick squeeze. A reminder that someone saw me. That I wasn't imagining it. I'd squeeze back and offer a small smile, grateful for that single point of contact in a room full of noise. I told myself their opinions didn't matter. I said it often enough that it almost sounded true. But the truth was quieter and heavier. building with every gathering, every dismissal. By the time her engagement party came around, I already knew how the night would go. What I didn't expect was to be cornered by a question that refused to let the lie survive another minute. The engagement party looked like it had been pulled straight from a magazine spread. White flowers spilled over rented tables, their petals catching the glow of carefully strung lights. A banner stretched across the fence. "Congratulations, Evelyn and Daniel." Each letter perfectly spaced, nothing out of place. It was beautiful in that deliberate, expensive way that said this moment mattered. I arrived early like I always did. Being early meant being useful before anyone noticed I was there. My mother handed me a list before I'd even set my bag down. Ice buckets needed filling. Napkins needed folding. Someone had to keep an eye on the catering delivery. I moved through the backyard quietly, fixing, adjusting, anticipating needs. Useful, quiet, out of the way. The role fit me so well no one questioned it. When Evelyn arrived, everything shifted. Conversations paused. Heads turned. She stepped through the gate like she was walking onto a stage, sunlight catching the diamond on her finger and throwing sparks in every direction. She laughed, kissed cheeks, accepted praise as if it were owed. The ring was mentioned within seconds. Its size, its clarity, how lucky she was. Daniel stood beside her, polished and calm. His smile easy but his eyes observant. He didn't talk much at first. He watched. When Evelyn introduced him, she made sure to include his credentials. Big wins. Big payments. The kind of success that sounded impressive even without details. Pride threaded every word as the party swelled. I stayed near the edges, refilling drinks, clearing plates, stepping aside when photos were taken. No one asked me to be in them. That was fine. I told myself it always was. Then Evelyn spotted me. "Verity," she called, hooking an arm through mine before I could disappear. She pulled me toward Daniel and a small crowd of relatives. "You haven't met my sister properly yet." I felt that familiar heat bloom in my chest, the warning sign I'd learned to ignore. "This is Verity," Evelyn said, smiling brightly. "She's just admin, keeps things organized. Answers phones." Laughter rippled, soft, polite, harmless. The kind that didn't mean harm but still landed like a bruise. I smiled because that's what I'd practiced. Because correcting her would make things awkward. Because this was how it always went. But Daniel didn't laugh, he was watching me now, really watching. His eyes lingered, searching my face like he was flipping through memories that didn't quite line up. Something in his expression shifted. Confusion, curiosity. A sense that the story he'd just been given didn't match what he was seeing. And in that quiet, suspended moment, I saw the instant everything was about to change. Dinner was announced just as the sun dipped low enough to set the string lights glowing. Chairs scraped against the ground as everyone found their places. I took the seat at the far end of the table, half in shadow, close enough to be included and far enough to be forgotten. It was a familiar position. Glasses clinked as toasts began. Friends spoke about love, timing, destiny. Evelyn basked in it, standing to offer her own words, her hand resting deliberately on Daniel's arm. She talked about partnership, ambition, and how proud she was to be building a future with someone who understood what real work looked like. Then she laughed and added lightly, "Of course, everyone contributes differently. Some people argue important cases, and some people answer phones." "Right, Verity." Few people chuckled. Others shifted uncomfortably. The comment hung there, dressed up as humor but sharp enough to draw blood. I felt the heat rise again, stronger this time. I stared at my plate, willing myself to stay small. This was the moment where I usually nodded, smiled, let it pass, but Daniel turned fully in his chair to face me. "Wait," he said, his voice calm but curious. "Verity, what exactly do you do at the courthouse?" The table went still. Even the music from the speakers seemed to fade. The script had been disrupted, and everyone felt it. I could sense eyes on me, some expectant, some wary, some already bracing for discomfort. I didn't answer right away, and that pause, years rushed in. Holidays where I cleaned while others talked. Dinners where my work was summarized in a sentence and dismissed just as quickly. Late nights alone, finishing things that mattered to people who never bothered to learn my title. I realized how much energy I'd spent protecting a version of myself my family found easy to digest. Evelyn's smile tightened. She felt it too, the shift. My parents sat frozen, unsure whether to step in or pretend nothing was happening. Lily's foot brushed mine under the table, grounding me. Two forces pulled at me. The old instinct whispered, "Soften it. Round the edges. Don't make this awkward." But something clearer, steadier rose up over it. This wasn't about correcting a misunderstanding. It was about refusing to disappear again. I straightened in my chair. Have you ever been in a moment where you had to choose between keeping the peace and finally speaking your truth? Drop a comment if you've been there. I looked at Daniel, then at Evelyn, then at the faces that had overlooked me for years. I understood with surprising calm that whatever came next would change things. There was no version of this where I went back to being invisible. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't smile. I didn't explain that. I said one word. Judge. The word landed softly, almost politely, but the effect was immediate. Conversation died mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. It was as if someone had quietly turned the volume down on the entire table. The string lights still glowed overhead. The music still played somewhere behind us, but none of it mattered. Everything narrowed to that single word and the space it occupied. My mother's face drained of color. She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger, lips parting without sound. My father blinked hard once, then again, his hand tightening around his glass as if it might steady him. Across the table, Evelyn let out a brittle laugh. "Very funny," she said quickly. "Okay, joke's over." But Daniel wasn't laughing. Something clicked behind his eyes. Not confusion but recognition. I watched him reassemble memory in real time, pieces sliding into place. He leaned forward slightly, studying me with new focus. "Verity Cole," he said slowly. "The courthouse downtown." The silence deepened, thick and heavy. "You presided over my case last year," Daniel continued. "Commercial zoning dispute. December. You ruled against my firm." I nodded once. That Evelyn's smile froze, stretched too thin to hold. "That's not possible," she said. "She would have told us." "I tried," I said quietly. "Once." Daniel shook his head, almost to himself. "I know what admin work looks like," he said evenly. "And I know what a judge looks like." My father finally found his voice. "Since when?" he asked, disbelief cracking through the word. 3 years, I answered. The number seemed to echo. 3 years of family dinners. 3 years of holidays. 3 years of being summarized, simplified, dismissed. I watched the realization move through them, not all at once, but in waves. Not just that I was a judge, but that they hadn't known. That they hadn't asked. That it had been easier not to. Because it was convenient. Evelyn recovered first. Her eyes flashed, and her voice sharpened. "You did this on purpose," she accused. "You let us think." "I stopped correcting you," I said. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to." "There's a difference." Daniel looked between us, then back at Evelyn. His tone was calm but devastating. "You never said her last name," he observed. "You never let her speak." That landed harder than anything I could have said. If you've ever been underestimated by the people closest to you, hit the like button. You're not alone. That I felt something shift. Not just in them but in me. The weight I'd been carrying for years loosened, just slightly. I hadn't revealed a secret to impress them. I'd simply stopped shrinking to fit the space they'd assigned me. Around the table, no one knew what to say next. The version of me they'd built no longer worked, and the truth was sitting there, impossible to ignore. That's when the night truly unraveled. The table didn't recover. Couldn't. Reactions rippled outward in quiet, telling ways. My uncle stared at me like he was recalculating every conversation we'd ever had. My grandmother reached across the table and squeezed my wrist, her grip surprisingly firm. "I always knew," she said softly. "You carried yourself differently." Evelyn stood so abruptly her chair scraped harshly against the ground. The sound cut through the silence. "You've ruined my night," she snapped, color rising in her cheeks. "You always make it about you." I met her gaze steady. "Until tonight I didn't," I said. "Until you mocked me. That wasn't accidental." She opened her mouth to fire back, but the words didn't land. For the first time, her usual comeback failed her. The charm, the laughter, the easy redirection. It all slipped. Daniel stood then, slow and deliberate. "Evelyn," he said, "the way you spoke to your sister. You're supposed to be on my side," she cut in sharply. "I am," he replied, calm but unyielding. "I'm on the side of the truth." Something broke in that moment. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for everyone to feel it. The orbit shifted. The attention that had always circled Evelyn loosened, redistributed. No one laughed. No one rushed to smooth things over. No one defended her. My parents sat frozen, caught between their two daughters, unsure which version of the family they were supposed to protect. I could see it on their faces, the dawning awareness that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a reckoning. Evelyn's voice dropped, raw now. "You think you're better than me?" she asked, fear bleeding through the anger. I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "I finally stopped pretending to be less." The words didn't accuse. They didn't explain. They simply existed, undeniable. Evelyn stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked inside. Her heels struck the floor in sharp, retreating beats, each one punctuating the end of something we'd all taken for granted after she left. The table stayed silent. And in that stillness, I felt something I'd never felt before. Relief. Like I'd finally set down a weight I'd been carrying for years. Daniel hesitated after Evelyn disappeared inside, conflict written across his face. He looked at me once more, not with pity but respect, then excused himself to follow her. There was no grand gesture, no apology offered on her behalf, just a quiet acknowledgement that something important had been revealed, and it couldn't be undone. Around the table, no one spoke. Champagne flutes sat untouched, bubbles thinning as they warmed in the night air. Plates went cold. The celebration felt paused, like a song cut off mid-note with no one willing to press play again. My mother reached for my hand. Her voice was small when she asked, "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and answered honestly. "Every time I tried to be seen, you looked away." The words settled heavily, but no one argued. There was nothing to argue with. My father stared down at the table. My uncle cleared his throat, then thought better of speaking. Even my mother nodded slowly, as if recognizing a truth she'd avoided naming. What surprised me most was what I didn't feel. There was no rush of victory. No satisfaction in being proven right. Just relief. Clean and quiet. Like setting down a weight I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. The party eventually dissolved. Guests made excuses, lights dimmed. The banner fluttered uselessly in the night breeze. I left without ceremony. The next morning my phone was silent. No knot in my stomach. No rehearsed explanations waiting to be deployed. Just calm. Then the messages started. Missed calls from my parents. Long voicemails I didn't listen to. Texts that ranged from confused to apologetic to unsure of how to begin. For the first time, the flood of attention didn't tighten my chest. Passed through me without sticking. Something fundamental had shifted. The dread I'd carried into every family gathering had loosened its grip, replaced by something unfamiliar but steady, peace. The truth is powerful. If this story is resonating with you so far, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Daniel knocked on my door the next afternoon. He looked tired. Not rumpled, just worn in the way people get when they've spent the night replaying moments they can't unsee. We sat at my small kitchen table with coffee between us, steam rising in the quiet. There was no awkwardness, no need for pretense. "I can't unsee it now," he said finally. "The way she talks over you. The way everyone lets it happen." He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to defend Evelyn or smooth the edges of what had happened. That, more than anything, told me he was being honest. "I don't know what that means for us yet," he admitted. "But I know I needed to hear it." When he left, the apartment felt lighter. Not empty, just honest. Like air had finally been let into a room that had been sealed for years. Days passed before Evelyn showed up. She stood in my doorway without warning. Hair pulled back, face bare. I almost didn't recognize her without the armor. She didn't look angry. She looked scared. "I was scared of being ordinary," she said, the words tumbling out fast, unpolished. "Of being second. Of not being the impressive one anymore." I listened. Not to win. Not to collect apologies. Just to understand. "I'm not here to compete," I told her. "I never was." She went very still. It was the first time she'd heard it. Not as a challenge, not as a comparison, but as a truth. Something shifted between us. Not healed. Not solved. But cracked open enough for something real to breathe. Nothing was fixed overnight. There were no dramatic reconciliations or promises. But at the next family dinner, my parents asked real questions, and waited for the answers. When I spoke, no one interrupted. Lily caught my eye across the table and smiled that we weren't suddenly close. Nothing was fixed overnight. But for the first time, I didn't have to make myself smaller for them to be comfortable. I used to think staying quiet was the same as being kind. That keeping the peace meant I was doing the right thing. That swallowing my truth was a form of love. Took me a long time to understand how wrong that equation was. Silence didn't protect anyone. Not really. It didn't make my family closer or prevent conflict. It just taught them how small they could make me without consequence. Every time I softened my words or stepped back so someone else could shine, I wasn't being generous. I was disappearing. Here's the truth I wish I'd learned sooner. You don't owe anyone a smaller version of yourself. If you've hidden your growth to make others comfortable, you're not weak. You adapted. You survived. But survival isn't the same as living. And shrinking yourself doesn't keep the peace. It trades your voice for temporary approval. Being seen changes things. Not because it impresses people, but because it frees you. The moment I stopped explaining myself, stopped editing my truth to fit their expectations, I felt lighter. I didn't need permission anymore. I didn't need applause. I just needed to stop erasing myself. There's a difference between being kind and practicing self-erasure. Growth isn't selfish. Taking up space isn't an attack. Your worth does not diminish to make others comfortable. And anyone who needs you to stay small to feel secure was never protecting you in the first place. If you've ever been there, hiding your growth so others feel comfortable, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if this resonated with you, hit subscribe. You deserve to be seen, not just tolerated. Remember, the people who truly matter will celebrate your growth, not resent it. What would you have done in Verity's position? Would you have spoken up sooner or stayed quiet? Let me know below. Family dynamics are complicated, layered with love, expectation, and unspoken rules. Sometimes what feels like affection is conditional, built on roles we're assigned rather than who we truly are. In many families, there's an unspoken need for a lesser sibling, the one who stays in the background, so others can feel secure in their spotlight. I learned that early, and I carried it like a weight I didn't even know was mine. It takes courage to disrupt that pattern. To say, quietly but firmly, I will not disappear for your comfort. To recognize the difference between humility and self-diminishment. Humility can coexist with strength. Erasure cannot. Truth-telling, especially when it challenges the image others have carefully built, can feel like betrayal to those who benefited from the lie. And that's okay. Their discomfort does not negate your reality. After the engagement party, some relationships shifted. Some improved. Some didn't. But I learned to find my people. The ones who see me, who celebrate me, who don't need me to shrink to feel secure. There's a freedom in stepping out of the role that's been cast for you. A freedom in finally being recognized for your actual accomplishments, not the ones they imagined for you. Your success story, every long night, every quiet struggle, every victory, is yours to tell. No one else gets to edit it. No one else gets to define its worth. When you stop performing, when you stop minimizing yourself, you open space for authenticity, for respect, and for the kind of recognition that doesn't need to be begged for. Before you go, think about this. Is there an area of your life where you're playing small? Where you're letting others define you incorrectly because it's easier than asserting the truth? This is your sign to stop. Life's too short to live as someone else's comfortable version of you. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about standing in your truth, setting boundaries, and refusing to shrink. New videos every week. I'll see you in the next one.